Wealthy billionaire husband secretly marries mistress pregnant wife's revenge, leaves him bankrupt. They say love and money are powerful forces, but when a millionaire husband, Alexander Beaumont, secretly marries his cunning mistress while his unsuspecting wife, Rosalind Carter, carries his child, those forces collide in the most explosive way. The whispered rumors of extramarital affairs suddenly morph into documented evidence, unraveling a carefully curated facade of wealth and respectability. On the brink of motherhood, Rosalind makes a chilling discovery that shakes her world to its core. Her husband's betrayal is not just emotional, but legally binding. Brace yourself for a tumultuous ride of revenge, scandal, and downfall. In this gripping saga, secrets turn lethal and retribution knows no mercy. From the moment Rosalind Carter first met Alexander Beaumont, everyone in her circle deemed it a match made in heaven. Rosalind, daughter of longtime Los Angeles businessman George Carter, had beauty, grace, and a promising future within her father's philanthropic endeavors. Alexander Beaumont, a self-made millionaire and CEO of Beaumont Holdings, possessed a rags-to-riches background that made the tabloids swoon. Their courtship was a fairy tale. Candle-lit dinners at Spago chef Wolfgang Puck's famed Beverly Hills restaurant, surprise roses filling her suite at the Beverly Wilshire, and sparkling diamond earrings from Cartier just because. Their wedding at the historic St. Andrew's Cathedral in downtown L.A. was the social event of the season. Among the 500 guests were real estate tycoons, celebrities, and even a senator or two. Cameras flashed, capturing Rosalind's couture gown hand, stitched in Paris, and Alexander's classic black tuxedo. The couple exchanged vows under a canopy of white roses, promising eternal devotion. Rosalind's father, George, couldn't contain his pride. For him, this union marked the perfect alliance between two families, the Carters, with deep philanthropic roots, and the Beaumonts, whose business empire spanned from real estate to technology. From the moment the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers. Newspapers later described their union as the embodiment of modern aristocracy. In the swirl of champagne toasts and wedding cake cutting, one figure stood apart. Ivy Marshall, a striking brunette with a sharp gaze. She was introduced merely as a distant family friend, slipping through the crowd with a cryptic smile. Rosalind, too caught up in the thrill of the moment, barely took notice. Little did she know, this was the very woman who would later turn her world upside down. As night fell and the revelers dispersed, Alexander whisked Rosalind off to a private helicopter for their honeymoon in Bora Bora. The newlyweds soared into the starry sky, convinced their future was brighter than any constellation. Yet, hidden in the glimmer of that perfect evening was a secret so lethal it would eventually cost Alexander everything he once held dear. Honeymoons always end, but real life continues. After 2 idyllic weeks in an overwater bungalow, Rosalind and Alexander returned to Los Angeles, where their new penthouse awaited them atop the Beaumont residences in Century City. Situated on the 55th floor, the apartment boasted floor-to-ceiling windows with sweeping views of the skyline. But from the moment they landed, a subtle tension crept into their lives. Alexander's phone seemed permanently glued to his hand. He would dart into side rooms to take hushed calls or leave dinner early with the vague excuse of urgent business. Rosalind, accustomed to her father's demanding schedule, didn't find it too odd at first. The business world never really stops, she thought, but something about his manner set her nerves on edge. Once she overheard him in a heated argument, muttering, "I told you to be patient, Ivy," before abruptly hanging up. When she asked him about it, Alexander dismissed the call as a minor crisis with a new investor. Her lingering doubts were soothed by his gentle kiss on her forehead and a quick change of subject. She wanted to trust him after all. They were newlyweds. Nevertheless, the sense of unease grew. A part of Rosalind worried that Alexander's newly expanded empire was controlling his every moment. Beaumont Holdings had recently absorbed a smaller real estate group, netting them prime properties in Miami and Dallas. Mergers like these required a steady hand and constant oversight. That must be it, Rosalind would tell herself whenever she felt the nagging sting of suspicion. Yet the calls never ceased. And then there were the mysterious receipts. While tidying Alexander's office, she found high-end boutique bills for items she never received. A $2,000 purse from Hermes, a $4,500 necklace from Tiffany & Company. While Alexander enjoyed spoiling her, these particular pieces were never gifted to her. When she mustered the courage to question him, he brushed her off with a vague statement, "I invest in jewelry occasionally." A friend's request. Don't worry about it. In the nights that followed, Rosalind found herself staring at the distant city lights, wondering if all was truly well. The more she tried to push away her doubts, the louder they echoed. Was her dream marriage already teetering on a lie, or were these just the teething pains of uniting two massive business empires and two strong-willed individuals? While Alexander immersed himself deeper into his so-called business engagements, Rosalind sought comfort in her old family home. She would visit George Carter in Bel Air, retreating to the familiarity of marble floors and rose-scented gardens. One afternoon, she found her father seated in his study, reviewing a contract for a humanitarian project in Africa. He greeted her with a warm hug. "You look troubled, my dear," George observed, peering at her over his reading glasses. Rosalind hesitated, not wanting to expose any cracks in her marriage. "I'm just adjusting, Dad. Alexander's schedule is intense. I barely see him. Comes with success," George reasoned. "But remember, if there's ever something truly bothering you, you can tell me." His paternal concern nearly pried the truth from her lips. Yet she remained silent, convinced that confronting Alexander herself would be better than alarming her father. She forced a smile, changed the subject to philanthropic updates, and left soon after. The entire drive back to Century City, her stomach churned with unspoken worries. That evening, she found the penthouse empty. Alexander had flown to San Francisco for a last-minute investor dinner, leaving a short note on the kitchen counter. The emptiness of their grand home echoed her loneliness, and Rosalind, once a confident socialite, realized she was retreating into a shell. She picked at a salad before curling up on their leather sofa, switching channels aimlessly. Headlines on CNBC lauded Alexander's strategic acquisitions, while lifestyle segments praised the philanthropic contributions of the golden couple. If only they knew, she thought. By midnight, she fell asleep, phone in hand, hoping for a message from her husband. None came, and in the silent hours, her mind conjured images of Alexander with the unknown Ivy. She told herself it was paranoia. Perhaps Ivy truly was some investor or executive, but in her heart, she knew something was awry. Marriage was supposed to build closeness, not spawn secrets. At times, she remembered her mother's advice, "Never ignore your instincts, Rosalind. They protect you when logic fails." Rosalind's instincts were screaming for her to unearth the truth. While Rosalind grappled with her growing suspicions, Ivy Marshall played her role with calculated precision. A name that had barely registered at the wedding now surfaced in whispered references across the city's wealthiest circles. Ivy was a seasoned networker, known for her graceful poise at charity galas and a rumored knack for luring influential men. Some called her the Velvet Viper. In truth, Ivy was born to a modest family in San Diego. After moving to Los Angeles in her early 20s, she climbed the social ladder through a series of strategic relationships. By the time she encountered Alexander Beaumont, she was no stranger to the corridors of luxury and power. Initially, their connection was purely business. She had introduced Alexander to an older gentleman with prime real estate in Malibu. One successful deal led to another. Gradually, the lines blurred. Ivy's compliments became flattery. Her business dealings evolved into late-night dinners. The more Alexander spent time with her, the more enthralled he became. She seemed to understand his ambitions, fueling them with her own cunning suggestions. When he confided about expanding Beaumont Holdings into a new region acquiring land across Florida, she offered him access to a contact network that promised quick returns. Thus, they struck an arrangement, sealed not by a handshake, but by something far more scandalous. A clandestine marriage license, reportedly filed in Florida to ensure certain property deals appeared as joint marital assets. On paper, it minimized taxes and overcame local legal hurdles. In reality, it bound Alexander to Ivy in a secret union that no one else knew about, certainly not Rosalind. Ivy had insisted on it. She'd told Alexander, "Trust me, this is just a business move. We both profit and we don't have to let it interfere with your other life." Ever the opportunist, Alexander rationalized it as an innovative approach to secure real estate. But in bridging that ethical chasm, he unknowingly opened the door to a double life that would soon threaten to destroy him. During these tense weeks, Rosalind experienced an unexpected moment of joy. She discovered she was pregnant. Staring at the positive test in the restroom of a private women's clinic in Beverly Hills, she felt a surge of conflicting emotions, excitement, love, and fear. She was ecstatic to become a mother, but how could she bring a child into a marriage shrouded in secrecy? Still, she clung to the hope that maybe this baby was the key to recalibrating their relationship. She imagined surprising Alexander with the news, watching him light up with paternal pride. Perhaps the pregnancy would ground him, draw him away from the relentless corporate deals, and remind him of what truly mattered. Brimming with cautious optimism, Rosalind planned a quiet dinner at the penthouse to share the news. She ordered Alexander's favorite cuisine, Mediterranean, from a reputable caterer, and set the table with candles and fresh flowers. As evening rolled in, she waited, her heart fluttering. He was supposed to arrive by 7:00 p.m. By 9:30 p.m., the dinner was cold, the candles burned low. She called and texted him repeatedly, only to receive sporadic replies like "sorry," "delayed," "keep dinner warm." When the door finally opened near midnight, Alexander looked exhausted and held a phone to his ear. Without even kissing her hello, he hurried to the bedroom to continue whatever frantic discussion he was having. In that moment, the spark of excitement Rosalind felt vanished. She realized that the baby news would have to wait, that her husband's world was teetering on a precipice she didn't understand. Silently, she cleared the plates, tears slipping down her cheeks. She fell asleep alone, the pregnancy test hidden in her nightstand, waiting for a moment that never seemed to arrive. 2 weeks later, Rosalind mustered the courage to share her pregnancy revelation. She chose a Sunday morning, hoping Alexander would be in a receptive mood. He was in the living room reading the Business Insider feature on himself, which lauded his success in sealing a lucrative Florida property deal, the same deal that Ivy had orchestrated. Unbeknownst to Rosalind, the entire article felt like a victory for Ivy, too. "I have important news," Rosalind began, her voice trembling slightly. Alexander lowered the magazine. "Yes?" She took a steadying breath. "I'm pregnant." A mixture of surprise and conflicted emotion flickered across his face. He forced a smile, but it lacked warmth. Wow, that's a lot to take in." Rosalind waited, hoping for a rush of joy, a celebratory hug. Instead, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. "Give me a moment, I have to take this." He retreated to the balcony to talk. Through the sliding glass doors, Rosalind observed his animated gestures. He looked tense, almost fearful. By the time he returned, all he could manage was a quick apology, explaining that a major investor threatened to back out of a Florida acquisition. "I'm sorry, darling," he said, pressing a perfunctory kiss to her cheek. "We'll talk more tonight." But they never did. He spent the rest of the day barricaded in his home office, leaving Rosalind alone to grapple with what should have been a moment of shared happiness. Over the following days, she told herself that once the business crisis settled, Alexander would embrace the idea of fatherhood. She desperately longed to see him excited about their baby, to imagine them as a family. Yet a dark suspicion nagged at her. He was more distracted than ever. By whom or by what? She could only guess. If she had known the truth, she might have run that very moment. Instead, she clung to the illusion that soon their life would realign, and the marriage she'd dreamed of would come to fruition. The turning point arrived when Rosalind stumbled upon evidence she couldn't ignore. One late afternoon, while reorganizing the storeroom adjacent to Alexander's office, she found a small, locked box hidden behind a row of dusty file folders. A wave of anxiety surged through her. She remembered her mother's voice. "A marriage without honesty is a house built on sand." With trembling hands, she went in search of the key. She found it in Alexander's desk drawer, hidden beneath a stack of business cards. Heart pounding, she unlocked the box and peered inside. At first, she recognized typical personal items, an old watch, some foreign currency. Then she spotted the documents, legal papers bearing official seals. Leafing through them, she froze at the sight of a Florida marriage certificate, dated several months before their own lavish wedding. The names on the certificate, Alexander James Beaumont and Ivy Lillian Marshall. Rosalind's mouth went dry. She reread the lines, hoping she had somehow misread them. The shock pounded in her temples. This wasn't an affair, it was a legal union. A swirl of questions crashed into her. How could Alexander already be married? Did he marry Ivy before or after our ceremony? Is my marriage even valid? Her hands quaked so severely she nearly dropped the papers. Digging deeper, she discovered property deeds listing Alexander and Ivy as joint owners, along with suspicious bank statements from accounts in the Cayman Islands accounts she knew nothing about. Each new page confirmed the horrifying truth. Her husband lived a double life, and she was the unwitting second wife in a twisted arrangement. Gripped by rage, betrayal, and heartbreak, Rosalind hurriedly replaced everything, locked the box, and returned the key. She needed time to think, to process, and to plan her next move. But one thing was certain, she wouldn't remain passive. She'd do anything to protect herself and her unborn child from the monstrous deception that now defined her marriage. Rosalind waited until late evening, stewing in her own rage and heartbreak, before summoning the courage to confront Alexander. When he walked through the penthouse doors around 11 p.m., tie loosened, eyes rimmed with fatigue, she stood in the living room holding the incriminating marriage certificate. No words were needed. The official seal spoke for itself. Alexander froze. A flicker of panic crossed his face. He dropped his briefcase, mouth tightening into a grim line. "Where did you get that?" he asked quietly, though his voice trembled. "Does it really matter?" Rosalind hissed. "You've been married to Ivy for months. Months! And you still went through with our wedding, knowing it was illegal. How could you?" He tried to reach for her arm, but she recoiled. "It's not what you think," he muttered, glancing away. "The arrangement with Ivy was purely business. We needed to appear as joint owners for a Florida real estate deal. And stop lying." Rosalind shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "It's a marriage certificate, Alexander, not a partnership agreement. I saw the Cayman accounts, the property deeds. You two share more than just a business arrangement." Alexander looked cornered, struggling for words. It was never about love. I needed Ivy's connections to secure the Florida deals quickly. We thought a legal union signed quietly in Florida would simplify everything. Then we planned to annul it, but you never did, Rosalind spat back, her voice trembling with disgust. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby kick, an agonizing reminder of her predicament. I'm pregnant with your child, and you have the audacity to be married to someone else. A spasm of guilt twisted Alexander's features. I never wanted to hurt you, Rosalind laughed bitterly, wiping tears from her cheeks. Well, you did. You hurt me in the worst way possible. And now you're going to face the consequences. She turned on her heel and stormed into the bedroom, locking the door behind her. On the other side, Alexander knocked softly, begging to explain further. Rosalind ignored him, sliding down the door until she sat on the floor, tears wetting her trembling hands. She knew that from this night forward, there was no going back to the naive trust she once had. Whatever came next would forever shape her life and her child's future. In the days following the confrontation, Rosalind wrestled with confusion, anger, and a raw sense of betrayal. She called the one person she trusted most her father, George Carter. Though she had initially hesitated to involve him, the gravity of Alexander's betrayal demanded she bring in her strongest ally. They arranged a private meeting at George's estate in Bel Air. Sitting in the regal study, surrounded by leather-bound books and antique heirlooms, Rosalind recounted the entire nightmare: the hidden box, the Florida marriage license, the stashed Cayman accounts. George listened intently, fury etching lines into his normally composed face. "You must leave him," George declared, voice trembling with anger. "This is beyond mere infidelity. He's committed a crime. Bigamy is illegal. My daughter will not be tied to a man who breaks both moral and legal codes." Rosalind clutched her father's hand. "I'm pregnant, Dad. It's not that simple. I need to protect my child. I'm terrified of a messy public scandal. What if Alexander tries to paint me as the manipulator? He's wealthy, influential. A determined light glinted in George's eyes. He may be wealthy, but so are we. I have the resources, legal connections, and friends in high places. We will fight this. And if it becomes public, so be it. We'll ensure you and your baby are safe." George picked up the phone and dialed Natalie Brennan, an accomplished lawyer from the firm Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, known for her work in family law and corporate disputes. Within an hour, Natalie was on her way to the estate. Once she arrived, Rosalind spilled every detail, handing over copies of the marriage certificate and property deeds. Natalie leafed through them, occasionally shaking her head in astonishment. "This is a strong case for bigamy charges, Rosalind," she stated. "We also have potential fraud charges, depending on how he used these documents to further his business. However, pressing charges means going public. We must be cautious. The best approach might be to gather more evidence, document everything. Let's strategize before we strike." Rosalind exhaled, feeling a measure of relief. She wasn't alone in this fight. With her father's unwavering support and Natalie's legal acumen, she sensed a path to justice. But as she left the estate that evening, her hand resting protectively over her belly, Rosalind knew the hardest part was yet to come. Confronting Alexander was one thing, destroying the empire he had built would be another. And she was prepared to do exactly that, if it meant safeguarding her future and her unborn child's well-being. Simultaneously, Ivy Marshall sensed the simmering tension. Over a quiet lunch at the Polo Lounge in Beverly Hills, she heard rumors that Rosalind had discovered something explosive. A mutual friend, known for her indiscreet tongue, hinted that George Carter was enraged about Alexander's double dealings. Ivy felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She decided to confront Alexander directly, arranging to meet at a luxury suite in the Beverly Wilshire, one of their usual discreet spots. She stepped into the room with an air of impatience. Alexander looked drained. The confrontation with Rosalind had sapped his energy, but Ivy was in no mood for pleasantries. "Spill it," Ivy demanded, throwing her designer purse onto the couch. "How much does Rosalind know?" Alexander sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Everything. She found the marriage license and the property deeds. She could take this to the authorities." Ivy's eyes flashed with panic and anger. "You promised me this arrangement was foolproof. If she goes public, we could both be charged. My name is on those documents too." He sank onto the suite's armchair, feeling cornered. "I'm handling it. But she's pregnant, Ivy. This complicates things." Ivy's lips twisted into a scowl. "Pregnant? So you're telling me we arranged a legal union for business gain, and now she's expecting your child? Unbelievable." An uneasy silence stretched between them. Ivy marched over to Alexander, her voice cold. "We have to protect our interests. If Rosalind tries to file charges, the Florida deal collapses. My own finances are entangled. We need a strategy to either keep her silent or discredit her." Alexander looked up, regret mingling with dread. She's not the type to be silenced by bribes or intimidation. This is going to be a battle. Ivy stared back, her composure eerily calm. "Then we fight. We use whatever we can, leverage the media, spin the story, threaten to expose old Carter family secrets if they push. Because if we go down, we'll drag them with us." In that moment, Alexander realized just how deep a hole he'd dug for himself. Between the devoted, heartbroken wife he'd betrayed and the calculating mistress who helped forge his success, he was trapped in a moral and legal tempest with no easy escape. Within days, the first rumors trickled into the upper echelons of Los Angeles society. At a charity gala for pediatric cancer research, co-hosted by Ellen DeGeneres and a Hollywood mogul, whispers circulated that the Beaumonts were on the brink of a scandal. Some guests noted that Rosalind, noticeably absent, was rumored to be pregnant. Others speculated about Alexander's secret ties to a second woman. By night's end, the hush had become a low roar, and tabloids like TMZ and Page 6 smelled blood in the water. Alexander tried to quell the speculation by making a show of generosity, pledging $1 million donation through Beaumont Holdings to a local children's hospital. Yet, while philanthropic gestures had once earned him glowing headlines, they did little to stifle the gossip now swirling. In the meantime, Rosalind and George, under Natalie's guidance, started laying the groundwork for a potential court battle. They quietly gathered more evidence, emails, text messages, and bank records that linked Alexander and Ivy in ways that extended beyond mere real estate transactions. The scale of the deception was astounding. Much of Alexander's Florida empire stood on the foundation of that illicit union with Ivy. Behind the scenes, Ivy activated her own network of contacts. She reached out to public relations specialists, some affiliated with real firms in Beverly Hills, and threatened to unleash damaging rumors about George Carter's past dealings. Rumor had it that Carter's philanthropic funds were once tangled in a minor tax evasion scandal decades earlier, never fully proven. While no official charges had ever been filed, the stench of even a hint of impropriety could tarnish one's reputation. As the tension rose on all sides, Rosalind retreated to her father's estate for solace. She woke in the early morning hours, anxiety flaring every time the baby stirred in her womb. She feared for the future. What if the stress harmed her unborn child? Could she trust Alexander to be a responsible father if all he cared about was preserving his business? Yet each day, she reminded herself, the best defense is unwavering resolve. She would fight for her child's security, no matter how vicious the battle became. A formal legal war began with a single letter. Natalie Brennan drafted a sternly worded notice of intent to Alexander, indicating Rosalind's knowledge of his second marriage and the potential bigamy charges that could follow. She demanded immediate separation, financial disclosures, and assurances for the unborn child's financial support. Failure to comply within a specified timeframe would result in a public legal filing. Alexander read the document in his office, heart hammering. He recognized the severity. Bigamy in California could lead to felony charges, prison time, and crippling fines. The letter also mentioned potential civil suits for emotional distress and fraud. Worst of all, it threatened to spark a scandal that could bring Beaumont Holdings to its knees. He forwarded the letter to his own legal counsel, Alan Weiss, a partner at the prestigious Latham & Watkins. They conferred in hushed tones over brandy late that night at Alexander's private club in West Hollywood. Weiss advised him to negotiate privately. Any public exposure would prove disastrous. "We must keep it out of court at all costs," Weiss insisted, swirling his brandy. "Your position is fragile enough. If you can broker a settlement with Rosalind, you might avoid criminal prosecution." But behind Weiss's measured tone, Alexander sensed panic. Even his high-powered attorney had rarely dealt with a bigamy scandal of this magnitude, especially one laced with potential financial crimes. The Florida properties were the Achilles heel. If authorities investigated how Alexander and Ivy used a sham marriage to manipulate real estate laws, they could face conspiracy charges. That night, for the first time, Alexander considered the possibility of losing everything. He recalled how the press once exalted him as the unstoppable boy wonder of real estate, only to imagine the tabloids labeling him a criminal. He thought of Rosalind carrying their child and wondered if there was any chance left to salvage their relationship. A flicker of remorse pricked him, but he quickly snuffed it out. Survival meant focusing on strategy, not sentiment. While Alexander scrambled to devise a plan with his legal team, Rosalind found an unexpected visitor at her father's Bel Air estate, Ivy Marshall herself. It was late afternoon when the estate staff informed Rosalind that a woman, elegantly dressed in a white Chanel suit, insisted on speaking to her personally. Unease coiled in Rosalind's stomach, but curiosity and righteous anger overshadowed her caution. She agreed to meet Ivy in the sunroom, a glass-walled chamber overlooking George Carter's manicured garden. Ivy entered with an air of defiance, her chin held high. Rosalind stood by the window, arms folded protectively over her baby bump, their eyes locked in silent animosity. "I want this to end with minimal damage," Ivy began, voice crisp. Rosalind almost laughed at the audacity. "And you decided to barge into my home to say that?" Ivy's lips tightened. "All of us stand to lose if this goes public. The Florida deals, Alexander's reputation, your father's philanthropic connections, everything is at risk. I propose a private settlement. I can persuade Alexander to pay you a substantial sum. You can file for an amicable divorce, keep the baby, and we all move on quietly." Rosalind felt a cold fury surge within her. "You must think I'm a fool. You two used me as a pawn to maintain appearances while forging your own marriage in Florida. Now you stroll in here, offering hush money." Ivy's voice rose, betraying her desperation. "This was never about love, Rosalind. You must understand. Alexander needed my network." "Get out!" Rosalind interrupted, pointing to the door. "Before I call security." For a moment, Ivy looked as if she might argue further, but the fierce determination in Rosalind's eyes quelled her. Ivy turned on her heel, heels clicking sharply on the polished floor, leaving the sunroom suffused with the aftershock of her brazen proposal. Rosalind sank into a chair, trembling. The nerve of Ivy to think money alone could right this betrayal was staggering. Yet a small part of her recognized Ivy's fear of the legal consequences, the public shame, the potential of losing the lavish lifestyle she thrived on. Well, Rosalind thought, that fear was justified, because I'm not giving up quietly. Emboldened by Ivy's audacious visit, Rosalind resolved to take the offensive. She returned to Natalie Brennan's office the next day with a newfound determination. There, they laid out a strategy to bring Alexander's empire crashing down if he refused to meet their terms: full financial transparency, a generous settlement, and an immediate annulment of his Florida marriage. Natalie reached out to forensic accountants from Deloitte, recognized for their expertise in uncovering hidden assets. The plan was straightforward: trace every wire transfer, shell company, and foreign account tied to Alexander and Ivy. If they found evidence of fraud or money laundering, the threat of criminal charges would force Alexander's hand. Simultaneously, George Carter used his own connections. He discreetly contacted a senior official at the Los Angeles District Attorney's office, hinting at possible bigamy and financial improprieties within Beaumont Holdings. The Dow official advised caution, but invited George to share more evidence when it became available. The next step was leveraging public perception. Rather than remain silent, Rosalind agreed to a carefully curated leak to a reputable journalist at the Los Angeles Times, an old family friend of George's, Rebecca Caldwell. The leak would not expose the bigamy directly, but it teased massive corporate malfeasance linked to Florida real estate dealings, ensuring that public curiosity began to pivot toward Beaumont Holdings. Within a week, Alexander found himself battling swirling rumors in the press. Shareholders began questioning the stability of Beaumont Holdings. Key investors expressed anxiety about ongoing deals. The company's stock, privately traded among select investors, took a nosedive in valuation. In boardrooms from LA to Miami, people whispered that the once invincible Alexander Beaumont might be on the verge of ruin. Rosalind watched from the sidelines, torn between vindication and heartbreak. She still carried his child after all. The father of her baby was a man she once adored, now reduced to a cornered figure staving off lawsuits and potential jail time. Yet each flutter of the baby in her womb reminded her why she was doing this. It was not just revenge, but protection. If Alexander had the audacity to orchestrate a secret marriage, who knew what he might do to defend his fortune? She refused to let her child become collateral damage in his twisted empire. Inevitably, the scandal broke in full force. It started with an explosive article in the Los Angeles Times, penned by Rebecca Caldwell, alleging massive improprieties in Alexander Beaumont's real estate acquisitions. The piece cited anonymous sources claiming Beaumont Holdings manipulated property laws by exploiting a duplicate marriage arrangement. While names weren't explicitly mentioned, the speculation soared. Within hours, cable news channels picked up the story. By evening, an entire segment on CNN headlined, "Real estate mogul Alexander Beaumont under investigation for alleged fraud." Social media platforms erupted in debate. Some argued that business deals often walk a fine line. Others insisted that bigamy was a moral and legal disgrace. Alexander attempted damage control, issuing a statement through a PR firm denying all wrongdoing and attributing the rumors to misunderstandings and personal vendettas. But the statement fell flat. In the court of public opinion, he was already presumed guilty. Meanwhile, Rosalind's phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages, friends offering sympathy, reporters fishing for details, even distant relatives desperate for gossip. George Carter restricted access to his estate, posting security at the gates to keep the paparazzi at bay. For Rosalind's well-being, he insisted she stay indoors, away from prying cameras. Amid the chaos, Ivy was cornered as well. Tabloid reporters staked out her condo in Westwood, brandishing microphones. Online sleuths discovered her role in a string of suspicious deals. Despite her attempts to maintain poise, paparazzi caught unflattering shots of her dodging questions while stepping into a chauffeur-driven SUV. For Rosalind, the media storm was both validating and terrifying. She never intended for the scandal to become tabloid fodder, yet the wave of coverage offered an edge. It proved to Alexander that she had the power to undermine his carefully curated image. If he refused to settle amicably, more damning evidence would surface. She and Natalie had hardly revealed everything they knew. With Beaumont Holdings hemorrhaging credibility and investors threatening to pull out, Alexander could no longer ignore the crisis. Through his attorney, Alan Weiss, he reached out for a settlement meeting with Rosalind, Natalie, and George Carter. The meeting took place in the conference room of Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, the neutral ground that Natalie secured. As they all gathered around a long, polished oak table, tension crackled in the air. Rosalind sat with her father on one side, while Alexander, flanked by Weiss, sat across from them. Natalie presided like an impartial judge, though everyone knew whose side she was truly on. Alexander looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, hair disheveled, his usual confident posture deflated. His voice trembled with pent-up frustration as he began, "Rosalind, I never intended for this to go so far." She didn't respond, simply raising an eyebrow. Natalie laid out the terms. 1. Immediate annulment of Alexander's marriage to Ivy under Florida law. 2. Full financial disclosures, including the Cayman accounts. 3. A significant lump sum payment to Rosalind. 4. Monthly child support once the baby was born. 5. Alexander's formal admission of wrongdoing enough to protect Rosalind from any future legal entanglements. Alexander winced, scanning the list. "You're asking me to destroy my entire company," George spoke up, voice steely. "You already did that yourself, son. We're giving you a chance to salvage something." Weiss attempted to mitigate. "If Mr. Beaumont agrees to these terms, we request that no criminal charges be filed and that Miss Carter refrains from further public statements regarding the matter." Rosalind's heart pounded. The moment felt surreal. She was watching the man she once idolized squirm under the weight of his betrayal. Yet a flicker of pity stabbed at her. This was the father of her unborn child, after all. Natalie nodded. "If Alexander complies fully, Rosalind is willing to keep this a private affair. But if there's any violation or further deception, we won't hesitate to involve the authorities. Is that understood?" Alexander hesitated, then nodded with grim resignation. "I'll agree, but I need to handle the Ivy situation my way." Rosalind exchanged a glance with Natalie, who pursed her lips. "As long as that way involves a legally valid annulment and immediate cutting of financial ties," Natalie said, "no excuses." The meeting ended in a tense stalemate, an agreement in principle, but requiring action. The next few days would reveal whether Alexander's desperate vow meant anything at all. Alexander's first move was to confront Ivy. He summoned her to a discreet, swanky bar in Santa Monica, choosing a corner booth shielded by tall, leather partitions. Ivy arrived in a figure-hugging red dress, makeup carefully concealing the stress that threatened to break her facade. Alexander wasted no time. "I'm ending this, our Florida marriage. The property deals, everything. I can't risk prison. I won't lose my child entirely. We're done." Ivy's eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with venom. "You're choosing her over me? After everything I did for your empire? I'm not choosing anyone," Alexander retorted quietly. "I'm facing reality. We committed a crime. Now I have to fix it." And where does that leave me? Ivy demanded. I have property tied up in this. I'm in danger of losing it all. Alexander exhaled in frustration. You can keep your share if you sign an indemnity protecting me from further claims. But you must cooperate in dissolving our marriage in Florida. Immediately, a mirthless laugh escaped Ivy. So you want me to walk away with scraps while you salvage your reputation for Rosalind's sake? Typical. Let me remind you, Alexander, I have enough dirt to ruin you 10 times over. If I go down, I'll take you with me. Her threat hung in the air. Alexander grimaced, realizing the precarious position he was in. But he also sensed Ivy's desperation. This is your best chance, Ivy. If you want to avoid criminal charges, you'll sign. We part ways, quietly. Their negotiation devolved into hushed arguments, culminating in Ivy stalking out, tears threatening to break her composure. Whether she would sign or retaliate remained uncertain. For Alexander, it was a grim precursor to the downfall he was desperately trying to stave off. Even as Alexander tried to contain the scandal, forces outside his control accelerated his collapse. A whistleblower, rumored to be a junior accountant at Beaumont Holdings, handed over incriminating files to the Los Angeles District Attorney's office. These documents laid bare a complex scheme, how Alexander and Ivy manipulated Florida's marital property laws to secure prime real estate deals under favorable terms. Investigators saw potential charges ranging from bigamy to tax evasion and even conspiracy to commit fraud. The DA's office launched a formal inquiry. Subpoenas rained down on Beaumont Holdings. Business partners, suspicious and fearful of legal blowback, began dissolving their partnerships. A major investor from Dubai withdrew substantial funds, citing reputational risk. The once stable financial foundation of Alexander's empire teetered on the brink of collapse. Amid this upheaval, Rosalind tried to preserve her own emotional stability. She had constant checkups with her obstetrician, who warned her about stress affecting the pregnancy. At night, she lay awake, the baby's gentle kicks reminding her that life continued amidst ruin. She thought about Alexander, whether he was truly remorseful or simply cornered. Ultimately, though, her priority was her child's well-being and her own sense of justice. Ivy's next move landed like a bomb. She publicly announced that she, too, had been deceived by Alexander. In a contrived press conference, she feigned ignorance of his marriage to Rosalind, claiming she believed he was single at the time of their Florida ceremony. The performance was enough to garner some sympathy, but her motivations were transparent: shift all blame to Alexander and minimize her own legal exposure. The media devoured the spectacle. Talk shows debated who was lying. Some painted Ivy as a naive victim, others ridiculed her story as a sham. Meanwhile, Alexander's attempts to distance himself from Ivy fell flat. The public loved a sensational meltdown, and he was providing a front-row seat to the biggest scandal in the city's memory. Days before the official indictment, Alexander arrived unannounced at George Carter's estate. Security nearly turned him away, but George decided to hear him out. They met in the estate's ornate drawing room, a place where George often entertained heads of state and fellow philanthropists. Alexander, looking gaunt and weary, spoke in a subdued tone. "I need to speak with Rosalind. Please, just for a few minutes." George eyed him with undisguised contempt. "Why should I allow that?" Alexander clasped his hands together, humility in his posture. "Because she's carrying my child. Because I owe her an apology, if nothing else." A tense silence filled the space. Finally, George relented, instructing the staff to fetch Rosalind. She appeared moments later, visibly pregnant, and paused upon seeing Alexander. In her eyes, he witnessed a mixture of heartbreak and resolve. He swallowed hard, I know saying sorry won't fix anything, but I want you to know I regret everything: my deception, the bigamy, the betrayal. I was blinded by greed, by the desire to expand Beaumont Holdings at any cost. Rosalind's voice trembled. Our child doesn't deserve this chaos. Alexander's eyes moistened. I want to be a part of the baby's life. Even if you never forgive me, please allow me that. I'm prepared to sign the settlement, do whatever it takes. She studied him for a long moment, tears glistening. You hurt me in ways I can't even describe, she said softly. But the child has no fault in this. If you genuinely commit to honesty and legal compliance, I won't deny you visitation. Alexander nodded, relief flickering across his features. Thank you. I'll finalize the annulment with Ivy and comply with everything else in the settlement. George stood by, arms folded, unimpressed. Make sure your words mean something this time, he warned, because if you fail again, we will bury whatever's left of your reputation. Alexander left soon after, uncertain if he had truly salvaged any piece of his future. But he clung to the slender hope that if he upheld his end of the bargain, perhaps he could still be a father to his child and maybe, in time, find a shred of redemption. In the end, the legal hammer fell swiftly. Following the whistleblower's evidence and Ivy's contradictory public statements, the Los Angeles District Attorney pressed charges against Alexander for bigamy and fraudulent business practices. His legal counsel negotiated a plea deal. He would admit guilt on select charges, pay substantial fines, and accept probation in lieu of extended prison time. Ivy faced lesser charges, given her own cunning disclaimers, but she was not wholly off the hook. She paid heavy penalties and suffered a massive blow to her social standing. As part of the settlement with Rosalind, Alexander had to publicly acknowledge the deception, ensuring she was shielded from any residual liability. Beaumont Holdings crumbled under the weight of the scandal. Investors fled, assets were seized or sold at fire sale prices, and the once towering empire that Alexander built became a cautionary tale in business ethics courses. Rosalind, with her father's guidance, used a portion of the settlement money to establish a new philanthropic fund dedicated to supporting single mothers facing hardship. She wanted to transform her personal pain into a meaningful legacy that might help others in vulnerable situations. In a final gesture, she legally reclaimed her maiden name Carter and filed for an official dissolution of her marriage with Alexander under California law. Months later, Rosalind gave birth to a healthy baby girl, Charlotte Ann Carter, in a private wing of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Alexander, by court agreement, was notified of the birth and granted a brief, supervised visit. He appeared at the hospital, looking humbler than Rosalind had ever seen him. He held Charlotte in his arms for a moment, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered to Rosalind, "for letting me see her." She nodded, offering no more words than necessary. For her, the path forward was single-minded: love her child, continue her philanthropic endeavors, and leave the wreckage of Alexander Beaumont in the past. In the swirling chaos of scandal and heartbreak, she had found her footing again, stronger, wiser, and determined to protect what truly mattered. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey of love, betrayal, and retribution. In the unraveling of Alexander Beaumont's double marriage, we witnessed how greed and deception can topple even the grandest empires. Rosalind Carter's discovery of her husband's secret and her resolve to protect her unborn child set a chain of events in motion that ultimately left Alexander bankrupt emotionally, financially, and socially. Amid legal showdowns, frantic negotiations, and public scandal, the stark reality emerged: no amount of money or influence can hide the truth forever. If you were enthralled by every twist and turn of this real-life drama fiction, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We have more captivating stories to come, featuring moments of heartbreak, resolve, and redemption. Join our community, leave your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for the next riveting tale that proves sometimes reality and the pursuit of vengeance truly is stranger than fiction.